Ricky Gervais in a Hollywood rom-com. Add a supernatural flavour and it all seems much too twee for the acerbic comedian who's been responsible for some of TV's most toe-curling humour in The Office and Extras. But in Ghost Town, Gervais is far from a winsome hero. In David Cope's debut as director, he plays a misanthropic dentist who starts seeing ghosts after an unfortunate experience in the operating theatre.
Did anything unusual happen during my procedure?
You died.
I died.
A little bit.
For how long?
7 minutes.
A bit less.
I died for 7 minutes.
A bit less.
Approximately.
That's really the
7.
only thing that I can think of that was
How did I die?
For the record, we did not recommend that you use the general anesthesia. When you use anesthesia, there is a chance, although it is small, of a biochemical anomaly.
Where's the anesthesiologist? I want to see him now.
Oh, he does not work here anymore. You'll be happy to know that at St. Victor's we have a very strict 3 strikes policy.
My anesthesiologist had 2 strikes.
Okay, let's all calm down. Everybody dies.
Yeah, but usually at the end of their life, and just the once, and forever.
Everybody's different.
Now, Sarah, this is quite a big move, isn't it, for Ricky Gervais, from television, BBC television by and large, to the big screen, from darker kind of humour to perhaps lighter. Did you enjoy it?
I think it depends entirely on your expectations. I went in with such low expectations that I actually did enjoy it. I thought it was a crazy piece of casting. I thought it did sound incredibly hokey, and I didn't expect to find one moment of amusement in it. But I actually thought that, I mean, and I think that scene was a good example of the way that the lines are witty, the delivery is surprising. Ricky Gervais is, again, it's all kind of glasses half empty and half full. He's a better actor than I expected him to be. He's not going to give Marlon Brando a run for his money, but I thought he actually was able to carry the film.
Will, were your expectations surpassed? Or?
They were pretty low, and they stayed that way. It reminded me, my mother, who was American, always used to say that, you know, when Woody Allen made his serious movies, he made them because he basically wanted to get access to tall blondes, and that's how I kind of felt about Ricky Gervais's move into rom-com. I don't think it was a professional direction for him. I think it's more of a kind of dating opportunity.
The thing is, I think he's actually very good in the first, 2/3 of the movie, where basically he's playing the most misanthropic, miserable man on earth, and he's had good experience of that in terms of The Office and in terms of Extras. What doesn't really work is the last part, where he has to turn into essentially a romantic lead, and it doesn't really work. Not actually because of him per se, but because of the script. Yeah. Because the script actually is. David Cope is trying to do this thing where, you know, he's trying to create a classy rom-com. So the film looks great, but it has this necessity to have a redemptive arc in it. So halfway through, he has to learn a lesson. Ricky Gervais has to become a good guy.
Well, that's very sort of standard Hollywood.
Exactly, and
kind of.
But that's,
you know, that's note 1A.
But that's actually the problem.
But I thought that I actually thought the beginning of it was great, and I laughed. I think I even laughed continuously for about 10 minutes. And I think one of the strong parts of the film is the ability to do these fairly long scenes with a slightly absurdist and, you know, slightly witty dialogue that just really keep your attention. And I thought the acting was really great. Yeah, but then as soon as it tries to fit into a Hollywood movie, then I think it starts to fall apart.
Let's try and remember what's at stake here. Gervais created one of the great comic personas. The Office at its best was as bleak as Beckett. It was a very, very high-class act. And what he did was create a persona that absolutely instantiated failure. And his whole problem as a comic and an actor is success. Success is his failure.
I don't accept that there's anything at stake here. I mean, it is what it is. And yes, it is.
What it is forgettable.
It doesn't undo The Office. It doesn't undo any of those achievements. He can't keep doing The Office for the rest of his life. And what it is actually a surprisingly amusing, you know, it is a romantic comedy. You can't complain that a romantic comedy is a romantic comedy.
I'm not complaining about that per se. I'm complaining about the predictability of it, actually. Like, what I think think what I like is the fact that they've set out to be ambitious and to create a crisp, sparkling romantic comedy. Nothing wrong with that. It's a shame, therefore, that they have to descend back into this kind of predictable.
Well, I mean, the
sense.
whole idea.
Someone has to learn a lesson.
The whole idea of
And-
being among ghosts is a very, very well-worn formula. It's been
I know,
trod
but
so many times.
I actually liked that aspect to it, and I thought that it was they had a potentially interesting metaphor there,
Absolutely.
where you have an ordinary man who he becomes a celebrity to dead people.
Yeah, but
and I thought that was kind of brilliant. That's what I liked about it, and I wish that they just continued with that idea, because that's fascinating. What happens to a person?
Except they have to ram home the message that, you know what, in life you have to learn to get on with other people. Tell me something I don't know, but don't tell that to me over and over again.
Which is, Sarah, I mean, very much part of a Hollywood tradition, as Candice was suggesting, isn't it?
It
I mean,
is.
there are references to Capra.
Exactly. It's invoking classic films. You can say it's it's a tired formula, or you can say it's a classic. It's a take on a classic. It's not as good as Capra, but it's turning Capra on its head. It's the reverse of It's a Wonderful Life. It's actually, you have a crappy life, and then you learn that your life is actually okay. And I don't think that is as tired as you're saying that it is. And I think that it has a little spark.
I'm too tired by it to become exercised.
I mean, I
think
as you are.
as an American, I thought it was refreshing.
Yeah.
To me, I'm sorry. I thought
absolutely.
it was. I thought it was refreshing. I was really. I was tickled by it.
I tell you what, I just applaud the fact that they set out to do something that was quite ambitious.
Yes,
They set out to do something that looked great and that had a great script and that had sparkling lines and was witty.
And the acting was
tried
really
to be
good.
more sour than just a fluffy romantic.
And it does all of those
but
things.
It doesn't actually achieve that in the final houses.
Yes.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Ghost Town Certificate 12A is in cinemas now. Known as the great chronicler of small-town life with a special relish for adultery, John Updike remains one of America's most successful writers. Just as the novelist returned to write about the later years of his hero Harry Angstrom in Rabbit at Rest, now he's aged his notorious Witches of Eastwick. The book was made into a best-selling film with Cher, Susan Sarandon and Michelle Pfeiffer, arguably a travesty of the original. In its sequel, The Widows of Eastwick, the witches are older, they've drifted away to different parts of the country. Updike takes them back to Eastwick, and it's not long before they reunite their mystical powers.
The three accursed women agreed to attempt resurrection of their supernatural skills on the day when Jane's tell-all X-ray was scheduled. Her anxiety about it might have otherwise projected a dark spot on the transparent cone of power. Propitiously, this day was Lammas, the 2nd of August, and the first of the 3 harvest celebrations on which a Sabbat was most appropriate. The moon, Alexandra saw on the kitchen calendar from Pearly Realty, would be 3 days on the waning side of full, which did not strike her as unlucky, although, in the event, it proved to be so. It fell to her to prepare the arrangements. The other 2 deferred to what they insisted were her profounder powers, her deeper reach into nature and the mysteries of the goddess. "I'll set it up," she promised them, "only if we agree this will be 100% white magic. I don't consider our presence in Eastwick to have been a success so far."
Now, Candice, this is 25 years odd since the Witches book. Do you think these characters are really worth returning to?
I really enjoyed it. I thought the book was very, very readable. I think one of the things that's interesting about John Updike writing about women, and I think he writes really well about women, and you know, I never feel reading his books like, oh, women aren't like that. But maybe it's because he's a man, but he doesn't feel an obligation to make his female characters likable.
No, certainly not.
Which I have to say, I quite enjoyed. And, you know, he you know, sort of takes the characters really out there to the edge of unlikability. On top of that, they're also 70 years old, which I think is kind of fabulous. I mean, these are not the normal sorts of heroines that one finds in fiction so much these days. And Sarah, I think, probably disagree.
Yeah.
I thought it was very readable, and I actually think I liked it better than The Witches of Eastwick.
Wow, I was with you on Ghost Town, but I'm going to have to disagree with you pretty strenuously on that. I mean, I don't think, I don't like saying this about male writers because I think that it's too easy and out, but in this case, it's just unavoidable for me. I don't think he gets women here at all. It's so alien. I mean, there's two major points. First of all, these friends are so bitchy to each other, and I don't think that close girlfriends, at least not in my experience, that dynamic does not survive, that kind of sheer bitchiness over and over and over again. But much more importantly is the way that he represents them in relationship to sex. I found absolutely, it was like Fanny Hill, you know, Memoirs of a Woman of Pleasure, when Cleland imagines the woman's response to the male body, and she's overcome with reverence and overcome with longing and awe. And he has these 70-year-old women remembering having their faces smeared with semen. I'm quoting here, gobs of it, remembering it, and that again is a quote, remembering it with longing and veracity because it was so fabulous. And you just think, what kind of a fantasy of old age pensioner porn is this?
Sarah,
I haven't even mentioned the dildo.
Do you think it's old age pensioner porn?
Well, I certainly think that was wish fulfillment on Updike's part, no question about it. And I think the psychology is dubious. I think the physicality of aging, you know, that's fair enough, the way that he describes aging bodies, at least somebody's doing it. But I
There's some
kind
amount of repulsion, though, isn't there?
to an extent, I mean, what struck me most about this...
Do you think that that's your sort of typical repulsion to...
You know what?
people?
Well, no, I don't think it's a question of a typical repulsion to aging people. I just think it's a certain visceral quality to the encounter with flesh, you know, and a lot of writers steer clear of that.
Not male flesh. The male flesh is clean-scented and perfect and glossy, and I mean, those are all quotations.
You know, he's not really writing...
Okay, hang on a sec, Echo.
I just found it was a weirdly purposeless book.
Absolutely.
It doesn't feel like it needed to exist at all.
Not at all. It's a potboiler.
What it is that, you know, it felt like, well, Updike, you know, he's finished his last novel, he's going to get to work on another one, I'll go back to The Witches, you know, we'll come back 25 years later. He doesn't really have anything that much to say about them. And so the plot doesn't really go anywhere very far, and it kind of exhausts itself. But the one thing I did like about that is the sort of weird meandering nature of the whole thing. You know, it's sort of, the whole story just kind of drifts off, and you learn lots of stuff about ancient Egypt. And I think my sense of that is, in a way, this is a sort of description of what it feels like to be old, not physically, but mentally almost.
But just on the example
of that. Absolutely.
But is there a lack of discipline in the prose, the meandering that Echo was talking about?
For Updike, I actually found that there was more discipline than I expected. I thought he was a little bit less verbose. Now, that my perspective may be that, I think I read Couples when I was, 15, stole it from my parents.
I think that's fair in terms of prose. I agree. I think his prose is more disciplined here.
I mean, I think it's more disciplined than in A Month of Sundays.
It's not that bad. But the level of form of the novel, the first third of the novel has no excuse for existing. Exactly. He follows the witches on tours and gives notes verbatim from tour guides that have no relationship to anything else that happens in the novel.
Do you think it was a flabby structure?
Yeah, I mean, it's a series of travelogues, really, and it's it's asking for a lot of loyalty from your readership that they're going to pick up a sequel a quarter of a century on, and I'm not sure how many new readers it'll get for him. What's interesting to me is that, Updike is a master of surface, it seems to me. He's a surface painter, and when I looked back at the Rabbit books, I looked at The Terrorist, which came out to great acclaim a couple of years ago, and The Terrorist is also really a novel of surfaces, and it's interesting what's happened to this kind of great triumvirate along with Bellow and Roth in their kind of twilight years, to be fair.
Well, what he's famous for, is the chronicler of the small town, and Eastwick itself evolves, doesn't it? It's moved away from the counterculturalism of the late 60s into a 50s small town style.
He says, but again, it's this crotchety old man, or he's just having rants about the fact that they don't live life the way that he used to live it.
Well,
so now he calls husbands castrated and little wifey in her itty-bitty house, and it's also condescending and deeply arrogant and really unpleasant.
I have to agree with you on that, and I mean, one of the things that is maybe slightly interesting is, in Philip Roth's last book, there was a sort of tirade about people using cell phones. Yeah. And it's so interesting, how the technology irritates but isn't that also a sign of being in your 70s?
Well, in a way, the whole book is about what it feels like to slide into retirement and irrelevance within the society itself, and that's kind of
But it has produced an irrelevant book.
Okay, well, that relevant or irrelevant book, The Widows of Eastwick, is published by Hamish Hamilton. Bleak House captured huge television audiences by aping Dickens' own method of serialisation. Now, Andrew Davies, does anyone else do historical adaptations these days, has dipped his quill into Little Dorrit. This story of imprisonment, both literal and metaphorical, has a special contemporary resonance with its focus on the misery of debt. For the new TV version, a long list of stars have been assembled, including Matthew Macfadyen, Pam Ferris, Mackenzie Crook and Andy Serkis. The Dorrit family lives in Marshalsea Debtors' Prison, where Dickens' own father was once imprisoned, scarring the author's life. Little Amy Dorrit, played by Claire Foy, was born in the jail, where her father, William Tom Courtney, is one of the longest-serving inmates.
Where did you go?
I went to call upon a lady, Father.
Just a social call?
Yes, Father, just a social call.
You weren't able to leave a card.
She didn't ask one, Father. It didn't arise. It wasn't necessary.
She understood you were a lady? She understood that my daughter is a lady, the daughter of a gentleman, as good a lady as any other lady.
Yes, Father, I'm sure she did. Father, I'm to go to her 3 days a week.
But not to work.
No. I think she needs companionship, Father.
I need companionship!
Of course you do, Father. But Mr. Chivery is here, and John, and you have so many visitors.
I never see Fanny, I never see Edward, now I'm never to see you.
It is only 3 days a week, Father. It is necessary.
Now, Echo, obviously Andrew Davies has had big success in the past with these kind of serialisations. Do you think he's lived up to his past reputation?
Well, to be honest, I was disappointed with what I've seen. I've seen the first 2 episodes, and maybe it gets better. But
there are 14 in all, aren't there?
Well, yeah. But so what I was missing here was, say, in comparison to Bleak House, something of real depth. It feels like light to me. You know, when we look at it tonally, everything's shot in kind of sepias and browns, and psychologically, it's got that same kind of lightness of touch. It's almost slightly too cheery. The Marshalsea prison, which is, you know, at the centre of the novel, should be at the centre of this story. It's essentially this kind of black hole, really. Actually feels like quite a pleasant place. Yeah. You know, there's the father of the Marshalsea, he's kind of there in a smoking jacket, you know, our hero Clenham gets trapped in there overnight, seems to have quite a nice time. And you don't get this sense of kind of, you don't get this sense of lives lived on a precipice between respectability and absolute destitution. And that's quite strange.
Will, did this seem Dickens-like to you as well?
Yeah, I had a belly full of this kind of treatment of Dickens, actually. I think we could be served by a better approach to him, and quickly, because he's radically in danger. It's when you see the kind of Dickens central casting, you know, the fine cast of Dickensian looking actors come gurning onto the screen, that you know you're going to get the same old go round. It doesn't mimic Dickens's method of serialization to have these half hours, because what you lose is page upon page upon page of incredibly fine descriptive writing. You know, Dickens is not actually dialogue heavy at all.
No,
so you're missing the bulk of what the book is about.
But you can't make a television adaptation with pages and pages of description, I think.
I think, to be fair, I mean, I think that it is a more conventional adaptation than, say, something like Bleak House was. It does, especially the opening episode, I thought was tired. Especially, actually, the opening sequence. I'm sure that Andrew Davies has done The Baby Born and Held Up before and that kind of thing. And I think that it misses the brilliance of Dickens's opening, which is to move from prison to prison to prison. And you really get the sense of that this major motif of imprisonment here that's not just Marshalsea prison, but all of these prisons that these people are living in. And the metaphors of prison and debt. I mean, we haven't mentioned, though, however, how apropos the story is right now. And I think that the kind of resonance of, well, it is actually, and I think the resonance of the questions, I mean, certainly, again, if they get it right, with the way that Dickens writes it, Dickens writes the whole point of and I agree with you that some of the metaphorical language will get lost, but if they do it right, it's very much a novel about a sense of obligation and profit and loss, and how do you actually spiritually, morally, as well as economically, how do you reckon your life in these terms? And if they can get that right, I think that will resonate.
Do you think there was anything of that in the television version?
I'm going to tell the truth. I haven't ever read Little Dorrit, so I can really only look at it purely from, an ignorant viewer perspective.
Well, all right, forget the ignorant, but from a viewer's perspective.
From an ignorant viewer perspective, I thought it was a little soapy, but I love Andrew Davies. We don't have anything like this at all in the States. So
You have better TV. That's what you got in the States.
I mean, I honestly, I thought it was very entertaining, and in my very simplistic way, I'm dying to know, like, what's in that box. But I thought it was soapy.
No, but hang on a minute. You know, it's not a cheap point.
Well,
you know what they make for HBO in the States is adult television.
Absolutely.
Why can't we have Dickens for adults?
Well,
Why do we have to have Dickens?
That's a good question.
I think it's not necessarily that fair a question, because actually we have had Dickens for adults. We've been somewhat spoilt. That's the thing. I think coming.
Well, I didn't think Bleak House was particularly adult.
I actually thought Bleak House was very good, actually. And I think
it was kiddie Dickens.
very
It was the
gimmicky.
same old kind of quirky old curiosity shoppy
But
set.
I do think that
and the
is-
same old, you know,
Was an
comics
attempt to be
playing parts.
slightly different with the colourblind casting?
I think that was one of the things that I think was interesting. Personally, I don't think it worked, but there's a character called Taddy Coram, who in the novel is an illegitimate girl from the Foundling Hospital, hence her name Coram. They're from Coram's Field, and they bring her in, and she becomes an interesting test of an important family, the Meagles, about whether they are tolerant or intolerant, about whether they are liberal or illiberal, and in a sense they're both. They're kind to her and taking her in, but they're unkind to her because they treat her like a servant. They try to do something analogous here in using a black girl, and I think it's my only way to figure this out is to say that maybe it's supposed to work in some analogous way to show that they could be both tolerant and intolerant, but it doesn't work at all. And in fact, Meagle, if they do this right with the story, Meagle is a racist character. He's going to have to show, unless they cut it, they're going to have to show that he is a racist character. So I don't know how they're going to make sense of this kind of muddle that they've created.
But I don't have a problem with the colourblind casting at all. I mean, God
But it's
knows.
not colourblind. It's very specific.
But
It's not colourblind at
I think
all.
I think on the stage those issues have been rehearsed time
of
and time
course.
again, and I don't think it's that much of a thing. I think the issue for me is it lacks density. You know, it's like when you think about Dickens is so much about the city that he works in, you know. And actually here, most of the shots are interior. We don't see very much sense of London as this kind of gloaming space where real drama and real psychological tension
Well, maybe the whole thing was made in debt. You know, maybe that's why it looks so low rent.
What, credit crunch drama in one way as well as another. Little Dorrit begins on BBC One on Sunday at 8 o'clock. Such a form as Grecian goldsmiths make of hammered gold and gold enamelling to keep a drowsy emperor awake. Yeats's view of Byzantium can now be seen in a major exhibition at the Royal Academy in London, the first of its kind for 50 years. Glittering mosaics, haunting icons and bejewelled book covers have been assembled from all over the world, including works that have never been seen before and some which will never travel again. The Byzantine Empire, which began with the dedication of Constantinople in 330, dominated the Near East, Balkans and much of southern Europe for centuries until it was sacked by the Ottoman Turks in 1453.
Byzantium is kind of shorthand for art produced in the city of Constantinople and in all the regions which it administered. It's a city of gold. It was the Paris of the Middle Ages. People went there, they visited, and artists from Byzantium came to Europe. It changed Europe, and in a way, the modern world really evolved. Constantinople developed Christian art out of Greco-Roman art. It's very much a European development with interests looking east. These works should look familiar. They're beautifully made, and they've lasted for thousands of years. We have the Antioch chalice. They used to think it was the Holy Grail. We have an icon of St. Michael at front of the Gates of Paradise, which was looted and went to Venice in 1204. The great debate is how important a role did Byzantium have in the beginning of the Italian Renaissance. And I think it did have a major role in the change of religious art in Italy under Duccio and Giotto. Owes an enormous amount to Byzantium. The kind of things that Giotto did in the 13th century, the Byzantines were doing in the 12th century.
Now, Will, I was reading that at the time of the last big exhibition 50 years ago, Byzantium was seen as other, exotic, Eastern. With the changing map of Europe, Eastern Europe, I think we're seeing it in a very different way, as much more rooted in our own artistic tradition, aren't we?
Yeah, I think so. I think there might be a tendency to see it as sort of Klingon empire in artistic terms. But in fact, I think what this exhibition does very well is to convince you of its centrality and to not make its art its art doesn't feel strange to us. And I think that the way that the exhibition has been set out interpretatively takes you into it very, very quickly, very, very smoothly. You need a very limited understanding of the history in order to contextualize it. And you start feeling very, very quickly that this is the center of things, in fact. I mean, the point about being ahead of the game in terms of Giotto and the Renaissance is certainly there, and even if you haven't got a particularly practiced eye, you can pick it up, and you can see that the interruptions, the stochastics of Byzantium are different to those in the Roman tradition.
But it's a huge time scale, isn't it? 330 to 1453 to try and absorb.
It's true, it's more than 1,000 years, and I actually felt like I was missing something. So yeah, I mean, a fantastic effort in terms of bringing together all these pieces, but I think the reliance on the art and the decoration at that time means you miss out something of the politics. What you miss out is the fact that across that amount of time, that empire's rising and falling, bits of it are kind of being eaten up by the barbarians.
It's the whole of North Africa and
exactly,
back again.
All sorts of people are kind of taking bites out of the empire.
Yeah, you don't need that, Echo, because you could just hang out with the monks of Mount Sinai painting those fab icons for almost 1,000 years.
But
that's what I'd do.
But the issue, I think, is you miss some of
the only way you could keep your head.
Yeah.
But you better do it well too.
You miss some of the context within which all of this stuff is created. You miss some of the reasons why they're so fixated on religious icons and so on and so on. Because actually everything else is chaos around them.
Well, I believe that one time period in the exhibition, they weren't allowed to make any icons, and they were not allowed to represent any of their religious or spiritual leaders, and they could only have symbols, which I thought was kind of interesting, because it goes back to that line, "Thou shalt not worship false idols." So it just got me thinking about how we as humans, and certainly in the time that we live in now with the technology we have, how worshipful we are of photographs and images of people, and how in a sense we worship people who in a sense are ordinary people. And so that was my interest in it.
And I suppose if that period of iconoclasm had continued, then we wouldn't have the marvellous icons that are there, which is such a highlight of the exhibition.
And they really are a highlight. I mean, I think that it is a provocative exhibition in a lot of ways. I think that moving through 1,000 years of history and 1,000 years of art is going to have an effect on you. It's going to make you, think about things in a different way. I mean, the person that I was with said as we walked out, he said, it makes you wonder whether there isn't more human history behind us than there is going to be in front of us. That there's this sense as you walk out of 1,000 years of history behind you. And I think that the other thing that I wanted to say is that I think that although there's that sense of history, I agree with you that what I really missed here was it needed more context, and I actually needed more information.
But this isn't a show about context or information. This was about fab paintings.
I don't agree with
this is fab painting, and really significant painting.
The everyday lives of the people?
But that was precisely what was missing.
Yes, I mean, one of the most powerful pieces was the little child's tunic,
the Egyptian little
and
tunic,
the little tiny little shoes, because one felt, there were real humans there.
Yeah.
And I just, that sounds awful.
So that's one end of the scale, and then there's the Antioch chalice, which is an amazing thing.
No, I wasn't really interested in that. That's a cup. I mean, that's like going to see a beaker.
The cup is incredibly
The icons painted by Angelo Saccatinos, these are some of the most splendid paintings in the world, go to the RA to see some of the most splendid paintings in the world. The hoodie and the shoes, I went with my 11-year-old and I said, look, that is a hoodie and a pair of Birkies. And he said, I'm still really bored.
What did you think about the piece with the little bones? Did you think they really were the bones of saints in there?
Who knows? There might be some cheese.
Okay, well, if you want to see the hoodies, or the cup as Will calls it, the marvellous, I think, Antioch chalice, you can see it at the Royal Academy until March. Well, thanks very much indeed to my guests Will Self, Candice Bushnell, Sarah Churchill and Echo Eshen. Newsnight and Newsnight Review will be back with a pre-election special from New York next Friday. Do join Kirsty from 10:30 when she'll be discussing Oliver Stone's new film W, a biopic about George Bush. For more details and useful links for both programmes, have a look at our website. Until then, from Gavin and me and all the team, have a very good weekend. Here's a sneak preview of Oliver Stone and W. Good night.
And here's the lesson. This is John Wayne in office. He was a movie star. He may have not looked like John Wayne. He's not as handsome as Josh Brolin, but the guy created 3 wars. He changed the way America is. He was a cowboy. He never backed down. He never apologized. He never said he had made one mistake in that last press conference. He was a simpleton in the office.
Deep down inside, you know I'm a guy like you. A guy you can trust.
Fabulous. Fabulous, Doug. What it all comes down to is who Joe Voter wants to sit down and have a beer with. And guess who that is?
Just remember, make mine non-alcoholic.